Wisconsin Eye's coverage of Campaign 2014 is being brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice supporting Wisconsin hospitals in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is at Dodgeville City Hall, interviewing candidates in the 2014 election. We're interviewing Mr. Ken Van Doren. He's a Republican in the 3rd Congressional District. Mr. Van Doren, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thanks for having me.
Just one announcement first. Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 130 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mr. Van Doren, give us your short bio and why you're qualified to represent the 3rd Congressional District.
Well, I have a degree in wildlife ecology, which made me a wonderful carpenter, building contractor. I've got a wide variety of experiences. I read voraciously. I have been active politically in issues as well as candidacies for over 30 years. I don't think there are very many people who know more about a greater variety of issues than Ken Van Doren.
Excellent. Can I ask you about some issues here?
Go ahead.
Let's start with, I'm curious, your website says there's no greater threat to the United States than the Federal Reserve. Can you elaborate on that, please, sir?
There's no greater threat to, that's not quite the way I put it, but it's close.
Okay, well, correct me.
Okay, well, there's no greater threat to our prosperity than the freedom, than the Federal Reserve, because they create booms and busts through manipulation of the money supply. And of course they have their friends on Wall Street, and right now, you know, there's no reason for the Dow to be at 20,000 or anywhere close, except that they're funneling money over that way. And that makes it, you know, for those of us who don't have the privilege of having a federal banker in their hip pocket, that makes it so that our goods and services are more expensive. And of course, you know, the little people get caught in the crush of the boom and the bust. It misdirects the economy, and overall it destroys more wealth than it creates.
And if you were elected to the 3rd District House seat, you would push for what on the Federal Reserve, sir?
Well, first we need to audit to find out who benefits. There was one very limited audit a few years ago, and you'll to bail out not just United States bankers, but bankers all over the world. You had the Swiss Bank, the Bank of England, a couple of other central banks in Europe were beneficiaries, as well as 35 private sector banks over there. It's not the job of the United States government nor the Federal Reserve, I don't think, to bail out people who have not managed their businesses well. And that's pretty much exactly what's happened. The poster child, as far as I'm concerned, for what's wrong with Wall Street and the Federal Reserve connection is a guy named Lloyd Blankfein, who's the CEO of Goldman Sachs. In the year 2009, Goldman Sachs got more directly from the taxpayers through AIG and that insurance program there than they made in profits, and yet Lloyd Blankfein still got a multi-million-dollar bonus. Obviously, that bonus was more for his political connections than it was for his economic acumen.
Another issue, sir. You say on your website you'd like to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Why?
Well, in 2009, Ron Kind had a health care forum in Richland Center, a few miles away from here. I was the first person from the public who was allowed to comment on that, and I asked him then, I ask him now, how do you increase the bureaucracy, increase the number of regulations, and then turn around and tax the very goods and services that everybody in that room agrees are already too expensive? Now, Ron Kind is doing me a great big favor by not backing up an inch on that. He thinks that despite the 25,000 pages of new regulations, that the price of health care is going to go down. Well, it hasn't. It hasn't. You know, even before the last go-round, it was up, you know, close to $3,000 per policy, and now it's set to be close to double what it was before the Affordable Care Act was passed. And as bad as those increased costs are, the very worst thing about it is that it puts a bureaucrat between the patient and his doctor, and that bureaucrat is not likely to be our friend. We've got a president who thinks that the federal bureaucracy can be used as a political weapon. I think you add this all together, we're in a very frightening situation, both economically and in terms of our liberty.
And it's issues like this that are the reason that you're running, right? Because
Absolutely.
you say on your website, life, liberty, and property rights, correct, sir?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. The first job of every government is to protect the rights of its individuals, and the best way I know to do that is through a frugal and constitutionally limited government. As we've gotten away from the Constitution, we've seen both our economy and our liberty go down the tubes. I'm not sure what we're going to celebrate on the 4th of July, but I doubt if it's going to be freedom.
Have you run for office before? Do you currently hold any office, Mr. Van?
I'm affiliated with Campaign for Liberty as education director, and I have been on the Boston City Council. I've helped other candidates run for office. I've been involved in issue fights. You know, one of my most, I suppose the biggest feather in my hat is that I beat Barry Goldwater in an election in Arizona.
You did?
Yeah. And how it worked was this. When I first moved to Arizona in 1985, there were the people, or the insiders were promoting this thing called the Rio Salado Project. Rio Salado is Salt River, 35-mile long so-called park, except when I looked at the plan, 2 out of 3 acres were for private development. And of course, the city of the Phoenix area, the state of Arizona, has a long history of corruption. The way I looked at that was these people were not going to get rich because of their economic efforts in a free market. They're likely going to have some significant help from the political process. So anyways, 5 of the 6 Valley of the Sun mayors, plus Barry Goldwater, who overall I think has done more good for the country than harm, but on his deathbed I don't think he was quite as sharp as he was earlier. You know, to his credit. But Ken and another fellow were the main debaters against this thing, and we beat them at the polls 2-1. So I've slain giants.
So you have
giants.
You have some political experience.
I have some
in Arizona
and in Wisconsin.
And in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Let's talk about 2 programs that are scheduled to be bankrupt: Medicare and Social Security. How would you fix them, sir?
Well, the first thing we need to do is to get more people contributing to them. There's 175,000 pages of federal regulations. That's a 35-story tall building. The first thing we need to do is chop down these regulations to something manageable, and it will liberate the marketplace. It'll put more people to work. The other thing is, I think it's insane to pay people 99 weeks not to be employed. You know, those taxes fall on the
employers.
Employers, exactly. They fall on the employers, and that means they have, if they're paying people not to work, they have less money to pay people to work, less money to provide goods and services. So if we get more people contributing, that'll go a long way. The other thing is we might have to look at the payout structure. You know, I'm on Social Security myself, but if it meant that we're going to balance the budget and take it easy on my kids, I'd accept some modest cuts, and we need to take a look at it all. Up until the age of 50, I would have gladly said, hey, I'll keep every penny I make from here on, and I won't take a penny out of the system. But at this point, I don't have the wherewithal to forego all those payments.
An estimate is that there are 11 million people who are in the United States and they're not legal residents. Do you think there should be a path to citizenship, Mr. Van Doren?
Yes, I do. The path should be, there should be some penalty to be paid. It doesn't need to be onerous, but it has to be significant enough to hurt. Under the Reagan administration, we had an amnesty program, and that did nothing in the long term to deter the illegals from coming over. I don't mind people coming here for an opportunity, and we're talking largely about the Hispanic community, and my experience with the Hispanics is they're very family oriented, and they're extremely hard workers, and they don't complain near as much as my children do. So there's a lot of good, and I also grew up near a Hispanic community in Milwaukee area, and I'm proud to count among my friends, Arturo Soto and James Villarreal and a few others. But I don't fear the Hispanic populations the way some Republicans do. I think what we need to do is make this the land of the free and the land of opportunity, and Okay, so back to the point. I'm sorry, I've been wandering a little bit here.
Path to citizenship?
The path to citizenship, no amnesty. There has to be some significant penalty. It has to hurt a little bit.
Okay.
And, when it comes to kids who were either brought here as infants, there has to be something a little bit more lenient than the parents who came across illegally. A friend of mine, Tony Vasquez, he says, he came here, or his parents and grandparents came here legally, and they scrimped and saved, and they never took a handout, and they made it, and they provided a better life for he and his sister. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that program, but I'd rather have the people coming through the front door than through the back door.
Okay. And
the other thing we can do to alleviate the immigration problem is to work on the Mexican government and pressure them. As hard as the Mexican people work, it's amazing they're not all rich except for the corruption of the Mexican government.
what would you do with the thousands of children who are now showing up crossing the borders from Honduras and Guatemala, sir?
Oh man, that's a tough one because I think what we need to, it's a deliberate attempt to flood this country and destroy our economy is what I see. We have to find out where the motivation is coming from, who is sending them. And if there are agents within the United States of America, I would hope that there'd be some criminal penalties to do that. Again, the other thing is if we promote free markets in these other countries, they're able to provide jobs there rather than here.
Okay. There's a national debate over same-sex marriage. A federal judge in Wisconsin just ruled that Wisconsin Constitution's prohibition on same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. What's your reaction to this national debate, sir?
Well, I really don't want the government in anyone's bedroom determining what's going to go on there, but I think what we see here is an overreach of power by this federal judge, because I look at Article 1, Section 8, and marriage is not in there as one of the powers given to the federal government, so I don't think Judge Crabb had any jurisdiction in this case. And if we're to have the rule of law, we have to respect the Constitution. And I guess I was disappointed in that. It's obviously a state issue, and Wisconsin can decide differently from Colorado, not only on marriage but on other issues as well. If you take a look at it, the roots of marriage licensure were rather racist in intent. It was an attempt to keep the races apart. That's a rather nefarious motivation, I think, in the first place. I think I would like to see the institution of marriage given back to the churches from whence they came.
Thank you. Let's talk about campaign finance. Some Democrats are calling for a constitutional amendment that would overturn the Citizens United ruling. Is the campaign finance system, which is evolving as a result of these rulings, is it broken? Does it need to be fixed, sir?
Well, campaign finance regulation almost always is a form of guaranteed incumbency act, because it makes it more difficult on people like me who are upstarts who don't have any great big political connections or big donors behind him. The other thing that I see with the Citizens United, I'm against any infringement on the freedom of speech, and that's what this is. And also, I find it a little bit curious that they never ever bring up the subject matter involved over the Citizens United, which was Citizens United was attempting to bring to the public the illegal and unethical activities of one Hillary Rodham Clinton. So if the media had been doing their job in the first place, there would be no need for CU to do this, and the case never would have happened. So I think all of that needs to be on the table as well.
So you support the Citizens United ruling and don't see any reason to overturn it, correct?
Not at this point.
Okay. What about your own campaign finances? Are you going to be able to put any of your own money or raise money to be competitive in November if you're the nominee against Mr. Kind?
Well, I think I'm the best situated to take on Mr. Kind, because nobody knows his voting record better than I do. Nobody knows his hot buttons better than I do, and nobody's as informed on the issues in this race as much as I am. I see competitors who, despite the failures of our foreign policy, you see what's going on now. The result is that we're leaving more radically Islamic inclined governments in our wake. If that's not the intent, it certainly is the result of what we're doing. But campaign finance, yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more money come into the Ken Van Doren for Congress campaign. And I've given pretty much as much as I can personally to it, so my success or failure going forward will be dependent upon the good graces of those who believe like I do in liberty and want to see that cause move forward.
Let's get into foreign policy, and one way to get into it, sir, is after Ron Kind supported sanctions on Russia for its actions in the Crimea. Thank you, sir. You said Congressman Kind should not have supported the sanctions. What's a better way for the U.S. to protest Russian actions in Crimea?
You know, this whole thing is rather complicated, and we could spend the whole half hour just talking about Russia and what's going on there. But if you take a look, you know, the last few years, you know, we've opened trade between the West and Russia, and, you know, the Cold War belligerence from both sides has rather subsided over the last 15 or 20 years. Now it's being recreated. Why is it being recreated? Well, we're proposing putting missiles right on the border with Russia. I think this is totally unnecessary because with ICBMs we can do the same thing from many miles away. It's inflammatory and it's unnecessary. Excuse me, some people would like to seal Russia off from its warm water ports, but just think about if somebody tried to get us out of San Diego, out of San Francisco, out of Roanoke, and out of Pensacola. We have a lot of warm water ports. Russia only has 3. They're all on the Black Sea. But again, it's unnecessary for us to take inflammatory actions because they have to come through the Straits of Bosporus. And we can lay for them there if we're worried about containing them in any kind of, you know. But the other thing is, you know, they still have nuclear weapons, and it's, you know, we should be doing a lot more negotiating than rattling sabers. What I see is that this saber rattling, it both justifies the aggressive actions of Putin to his people, you know, because he says, gee, there's that American threat. Well, when we're proposing missile sites right on their border, that makes it a lot more credible. And, you know, to put it into perspective, let's think about what happened when there was this missile base being built in Cuba, 90 miles from our shores. Yeah. We took exception to it.
Kennedy versus Khrushchev, yes.
Absolutely. See, what's going on, I think, is there's a geopolitical game of both economics and military. And, you know, we're trying to seal off Russia from its markets in Western Europe for its petroleum products. That's insane. Let's just have peace. We won't have to have all these weapons of war. And, you know, we can get our oil from Canada or from our own resources now that the Bakken is open and supplying. And I just see no need for the great belligerence, and sanctions are, by the way, an act of war. And usually they punish the people more than they do the governments involved.
Well, let's explore this a little bit more. What lessons about fighting international terrorism and limits on U.S. foreign policy have we learned from Afghanistan and Iraq? And you're well aware of the Iraq turmoil now, with the terrorists, even disavowed by the Taliban, making great gains in Iraq. So lessons we've learned as a country, sir? Well,
I have a friend, his name is Yuri Maltsev, and he says the great lesson of history is that it doesn't teach us anything. Oh, by the way, he was a former economic advisor to Gorbachev, an interesting fellow. But what I see, let's see, what was the question again?
Lessons learned about fighting international terrorism.
Okay. What I've long maintained is that if we weren't over there fighting them, they would be fighting each other. And that's exactly what's going on in Iraq today. Wherever I mean, if you take a look even in Iran, you know, we got involved and we supported the Shah, and there was some resentment there, and they wound up with a more radical Islamic government, and that was, what, 20, 30 years ago that all of that happened. We supported Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood rebels in Libya and in Egypt, and now I'm going to go out on a limb here and call him Insane McCain. And our president both want to support these Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda connected rebels in Syria. Now that doesn't make Assad or Gaddafi or Mubarak good guys, but what that means is that, hey, it's none of our darn business if it's not a serious threat to the United States of America. So our better bet in most instances is to stay the heck out. By interfering in these countries, we create resentment toward the United States, even if our intentions there are nothing but benign. And in terms of getting the oil, I remember back in 1973, one industrial country got their oil every single day. And why? That's because Japan did not involve itself in the internal politics of those Middle East countries. So, you know, where there is a clearly defined national threat, absolutely, let's go get them. Let's bomb the bejeebers out of them and get our boys and girls home as quickly as possible. These never-ending, no-win wars are sucking the lifeblood out of both our military and our economy. They cannot persist.
How do you feel about the exchange of 5 Taliban terrorists for 1 U.S. soldier, sir?
Well, the guy walked, he went AWOL. It seems to me a very good deal from the Islamic side of it. But again, these people, these 5 people that we're releasing, if we weren't in Afghanistan, how would they be a threat to us? You know, let's keep them there. The other thing is, you know, allegedly one of them said, "I'll see you in the streets of New York." I have no problem limiting immigration from the Middle East if this is going to be a source of those who mean us ill. And there are rumors of cells of Islamists right here in this country. You take a look at Dearborn and they're talking about Sharia law and places like that. If our national security is involved, hey, let's keep them over there, not allow them in here.
One more question on international issues. How real of a threat is climate change, sir, do you believe?
Well, let's see. I remember climate change in 1970. There were people saying, hey, we have to do something and we have to do it now before it's too late. One difference between 1970 and now is they were talking about global cooling. And there was serious talk that, you know, the glaciers would be licking up on the city limits of Madison, where I went to school. I was at the first Earth Day to hear a lot of this stuff. And, you know, the interesting thing was there's a professor there, a climatologist named Reed Bryson, and he was saying that at the rate of increase of airline traffic in 1970, by the year 2000, it would be doubtful if we would ever see the sun because the contrails of all those airplanes would merge into one giant cloud. Well, I'm not sure what that yellow thing was up in the sky, but it sure looked like the ball of the sun in the year 2000. So not only was Mr. Bryson wrong, he was wrong in the wrong direction. Not only that, airline traffic grew exponentially after 1970 due to deregulation. So the curious thing is that he did an about-face and became a climate warmer instead of a climate cooler, to no apparent damage to his reputation as a climatologist. Now, the Earth obviously cools and warms for reasons that we don't entirely understand. If you take a look at the medieval warming period, Eric the Red and his descendants settled in Greenland and successfully farmed for a number of centuries. And that came to an end in about the year 1300 or so when the climate cooled. And we also know there's something called the Little Ice Age, which helped take out Napoleon Bonaparte at Waterloo when he tried to march across Europe into the teeth of winter and attack Moscow. Very, very foolish. That year that he did that was known as the year without a summer. So those two events were wiped out by Mr. Mann and his so-called hockey stick. I don't buy it because we have historical references that prove that there was a medieval warming and that there was a very substantial Little Ice Age, which we started to come out of about the time that thermometers became generally available.
Well, quick follow-up question. Do you support the Keystone Pipeline, sir?
Well, I support a free market in energy, and if that means a Keystone Pipeline, yeah. There are other things we need to get out of the way. EPA has cost this country many jobs. The coal technology we have today is not the same as it was 30 or even 50 years ago. Coal burns a lot cleaner, and we have this capital investment in some 500 power plants, and over 200 of them have been prematurely sat on the sidelines. And here in Wisconsin, in addition to 4 power plants, 4 paper plants have been closed, costing us many thousands of good, solid middle-class jobs, thanks to Ron Kind and his support of Barack Obama and the EPA.
Wrapping up here, I want to give you a chance to talk about any major issues that are important to your campaign that I haven't asked about, sir.
Well, let's see, we covered the Fed, we covered
policy,
Obamacare, and we covered
healthcare.
Foreign policy.
Yep.
You were
Medicare,
going to
Social
ask
Security.
about what differentiates me from the other candidates. Is that still coming?
That's my final question. If sure, what differentiates you from I think your one primary opponent, Mr. Kurtz?
Well, there's another one too.
Okay, go ahead.
But
highlights,
you know, what differentiates me is I didn't drop from a cloud just in time to run for this. I've been working on issues. I've got a long and wide trail that you can tell where I came from. And, you know, I just find it a little less than credible that somebody pops up at the last minute and runs for office. I mean, I've been lied to before. Even if he does believe what he says, I've been lied to before, and I'm always just a little bit suspicious. You know, my trail is long and wide. I've supported candidates. I've worked inside the party. I do educational talks on things like money and banking. I'm going to do one up in Menominee this week on the negative effects of government involvement, crony capitalism, public-private partnerships, and subsidies to business. It creates less wealth, not more. Those are the kind of things that I've done that I can't even find that either of my opponents as much as wrote a letter to the editor before they threw their hats in the ring.
I understand. Well, very good. Ken Van Doren of Mauston is a Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District. Mr. Van Doren, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Hope I did.